Well, we're in the third Sunday of Advent, and I have to say, this week, it was nice to get away from the Christmas music for this particular podcast because I'm being inundated with it now. I like it, but it's just a little too much, don't you think?
Yeah, I have to, as you know, I limit my exposure till after December 1st.
Your exposure.
And then...
It's like it's some guy with an opening his overcoat. Oh, it's exposing. Christmas music is being exposed to me.
Yes, the trench coat is opened, and then
for the whole month of December.
For the whole month of December, and if I could at all possibly, I would put it off until this week. But I've already had a few weeks of it, and so it was nice to get away from it and listen to some other things. Maybe I can go back and not only listen to some of the new music for Christmas this year, but some of my old favorites, because I haven't pulled some of those out yet. So by the way, it's not too late. If you're listening to this episode 42 of Adult Music, the not Christmas episode, there's still time before Christmas to go back to last week, episode 41, to our Christmas music naughty and nice episode, if you want to find some new releases for this year's season. Next week that aren't
really beaten to death kind of things either. I think we had no vocalists. Well, we had vocals in classical music, but they were choral. That's a different thing.
Yeah, and Nora Jones.
And they're very old. We had Nora Jones. I forgot about her. God, how could I forget about her? I hear her every day.
Now you do, yeah.
Maybe I'm just repressing. No, I shouldn't do that because I'm just hearing too much of it. But no, I love that record. I think it was really
just one more week and then we'll be free from it.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, for listeners, the thing about Christmas music is that we did our Christmas episode and it's done. So I just want to recommend two more classical Christmas releases for you to listen to that I thought were excellent, and they were both actually recommended by Presto Music too, and that's how I found out about them. One of them is a Renaissance era Christmas album called An Elizabethan Christmas. It's by Fretwork, and it's on the Signum label. And it's mostly music by William Byrd and Anthony Halborn, played by Fretwork, who are a consort of viols, so an early version of a string quartet. It's sort of like if you think of these old like cello-looking instruments or violins, without any vibrato at all. It's very pretty. It might be a little too somber for a lot of people out there. If anyone likes their Christmas to be peppy, which I don't. I think we decided we both do it last week, right?
Won't be peppy when you look at those credit card statements next month. So
yeah.
Get yourself in the mood.
Another one is an album by Christiane Karg, soprano, and she's playing with who was it? I should look it up, but anyway, I think a good ensemble. And it's called Licht der Welt, German, which means light of the world. And it's songs by I guess romantic and modernist composers that have to do with Christmas. So things by Saint-Saëns and Ravel and people like that. It's pretty interesting. I've never heard anything quite like this before, like an assembling of all these just sort of lieder, really, that are about Christmas. It was really good. I found out about it a little too late for last week's episode, but I want to recommend everybody hear that too. I believe that's on the I don't know what label it's on. I'm not going to say because I might make a mistake. Okay. But check it out. Just do a search and you'll find it. Anyway, recommend it to everybody, those two as well. Because we're not going to talk about them next year because we'll probably have something else.
Yeah.
Or we'll skip the Christmas episode altogether. Who the hell knows? I don't know.
We'll see. Oh, and in jazz, there was an album I didn't mention because I think it was actually released last year or the year before, but now it looks like it's been re-released. Because it comes up on the Deezer new releases in as the deluxe edition.
I hate when they do that. It's
I
so
know.
bad. They add 3 songs. Now I got to buy the album again.
And I have a feeling that, the way these were released is similar. Anyway, it's the Stephen Feifke Big Band, who we've done 2 of their albums. And
yeah, we really like them, actually.
Yeah, so the second one we did the prelude, I think it was called that. It was actually recorded before the album that we just first discussed, and then that one was released later, even though it was recorded previously. A lot of these recordings are going to digital first, and it's hard to see if there's a CD. So anyway, this is a pretty good recording. It's with the trumpeter and vocalist Benny Bannock, Seasons Swinging Greetings. And I guess I haven't heard the deluxe version, so maybe I'll go back and see what's on there. And I think it may have been a shorter release before. And hey, you also get the Dreidel Song. So how can you go wrong?
Is the Dreidel Song on that?
The Dreidel Song is on it, yeah.
Oh, wow. I mentioned that last week.
Yeah.
That's all it would have taken for us to call it a holiday episode.
Holiday special. That's right.
But we went with Christmas. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So this week we're getting away from that.
We're getting away. It's episode 42 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. And as always, listeners, please note that in the episode description, you're going to find, you'll find links to Spotify and Apple Music for some of the music.
Oh, because I chose a Hyperion release, two Hyperion releases this week, so they don't have any, they don't release their music onto these streaming apps.
That's right.
Well, good for them in a way, but you can only sample them on their website. You can't really hear the whole album or track.
Yeah, so for those releases, I've got the Hyperion Records page where you can hear the samples, and also Presto Music where you can purchase them if you so desire. All the rest you'll find for Apple Music and Spotify, and then those tunes which are available on streaming the recordings, the episode playlist for Deezer, our preferred streaming provider. And you can also listen to the podcast on Deezer and see our playlists. Our username is Adult Music Podcast. Now, if you don't see the links on whatever platform you're listening to on, or the view is not easy to see, everything's clear and easy to follow over on our host, Podbean, and you can check out all of our back episodes there as well. If you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe on whatever app or platform you're listening to us on. Take a moment, give us a ranking, write a review. That helps us get listed in the browsing category recommendations, and we've been near the top in music commentary in Podbean, which is nice. Because that helps us. Yeah, we rule. I think we were number 5, which is nice. Yeah. And that helps us grow our audience, get us new listeners. And if you'd like to contact us directly, if you have any comments, questions, complaints, bring it on to our email address.
Yeah, or if you just want to wish us Merry Christmas, send us a message. We'd love to hear from that.
We'd
love to hear your holiday wishes.
Just say hi. Let us know who you are.
Yeah.
We'd like to know about our listeners. Our contact is Adult Music Podcast. That's all one word, at gmail.com.
Yeah, I want to mention, by the way, we did hear from Bruno D'Ambra, whose album we talked about.
Gesualdo.
Back, yeah. He wrote to me on my Facebook author page. Okay, so you can check that out there. He wished us a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
That was nice.
Actually, I think he specifically said Happy Holidays, which was very nice of him. It was very thoughtful. Right. So we'll be hearing more from him apparently in the future.
I wonder if he's listening to the podcast. If you are, Merry Christmas, Bruno.
Merry Christmas, Bruno. And and to your band and
keep us updated on any new releases you have. Be happy to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, are we ready to go here? Because
we're going to go way back in the time machine to start out this week, aren't we?
We are. Now, I'm going to mention, first of all, when I was thinking of the classical, this is the last podcast of new material that we're doing this year. Next week, we're going to talk about our favorite releases of the year that we have featured on the podcast mostly. And so that'll be our last podcast of the year. And then we'll be right back. And, we'll have a podcast next week. And then the week after that, January 2nd, we'll be back to talking about
new music,
new recordings that came out in 2021, basically. Because, I
don't think anything will come out.
It's too soon for anything to come out in 2022. Although on January 7th, I know that Hyperion is releasing 2 albums that I definitely want to talk about on this podcast. So we'll do that probably towards the end of January, beginning of February at some time. Yeah, I have to get them and hear them. Hyperion, of course, Records, of course, does not release their music to streaming sites. And I've chosen two of them today. And the first one is an album by the Gesualdo 6 called Josquin's Legacy. Now, one of the reasons I chose this for today is because, if you will recall, this 2021 is the 500th anniversary of Josquin's death. And since it's ending, I thought we should go out with some Josquin.
Sounds good.
This was a particularly good record. Yeah, why not?
Well, by the way,
yeah,
that Gesualdo 6 Christmas recording is quite nice as well.
Yeah, that came out, I think it was last year.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one, too. I do have that.
Yeah.
They do an a cappella, harmonized version of Jingle Bells at the very end of that, which is very interesting.
It's a nice Christmas album that's not overly Christmassy. So,
yeah. How did you manage to hear that? If it's in Hyperion, you just sample
I think I borrowed that from you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I do have that one. I have all of their releases. I've just liked what they've done so far.
Yes.
I don't know that I'm going to keep up with them, though, but they are excellent. And so is this album, by the way. I'll just, there it is. Spoiler alert. This is a pretty great record, too, just like everything else this ensemble has released. Okay, so, by the way, we're not done with Josquin. We're planning a guitar episode in the future, right?
That's right.
And, this is going to be a Josquin guitar album that I'm going to feature on that. Cool. I think you'll really enjoy. It's not guitar, it's going to be Vihuela, but that's a different album, not this one. So I don't want to talk about that yet. Okay, so this is called Josquin's Legacy. Now, if we will recall, Josquin was the great composer of his era. He lived from 1450 around to 1521. So the Renaissance era, the earlier Renaissance era. And he's also, I think he's also partially responsible, because he was such a great composer, for drawing the church's ire towards him, because he was writing these incredibly florid works that you couldn't understand the words because the counterpoint was so dense. So this led to the church wanting to actually eliminate the Catholic Church. Eliminate music from the mass, and like the lone. I think Robert Greenberg compared Palestrina to the Lone Ranger riding in to save the day. We have music in the Catholic Church today really because of Palestrina. He figured out a way to present this counterpoint in a way such that you could understand the words. So that was his big, genius stroke. And actually, Palestrina's counterpoint is taught today in music schools. To this day,
they did that all without amplification and auto-tune?
Yeah.
Wow.
Without auto-tune. In fact, when you hear this album, this Gesualdo 6's album, Josquin's Legacy, the one I'm about to talk about, there's no auto-tune on this at all. And it's unbelievably accurate singing. It's really amazing what human beings can do. What's
really amazing about it, because the first time I listened to their previous album, the Christmas recording, I didn't realize I was listening to an all-male vocal ensemble. So the high range voices, this is all a bunch of dudes, all guys. So that's pretty amazing too, because the vocal range, along with the flawless technique, and it's done in a very they are English, so it's sort of has some sort of Englishness to their style of it, but that makes it very clean, and the performances are incredible.
England being one of the great, having one of the great choral traditions in the world, along with, I believe, Russia and the USA. Mostly, the Black American USA. They really have a really special sound when they sing.
I think the Scandinavians have a good choral tradition too, especially for religious music. Yeah,
I believe
it's nice that they keep this going. Because a lot of this music, especially the religious music, it lasts forever. I mean, when you listen to this, it's amazing to think how old this music really is.
Well, in a way, you share it with that era and all the eras that came in, although people stopped listening to this until just recently, when it was rediscovered in the I guess, the mid-20th century. This wasn't being sung before that because it had disappeared. There was a repertoire, and that just keeps being expanded and expanded by researchers and things like that. And it's just made my listening life just so enjoyable. It's really been fantastic. I pretty much started listening to classical music in college when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I was just kind of dipping into it, and at this time, all this like period instrument stuff had come out, and I was listening to rock and roll, and there was something about, or rock music, let's say, and there was something about period instrument sound that it was kind of edgy. It wasn't like this kind of smooth blend that would have put me off at the time. So I got into it like right away, and it's still like that. It still has a certain edge to it, but we've gotten used to it, I think.
And what I like about this music, we've talked about this before, but it's really hard to listen to this, really extremely old music without coming through the filter of our expectations from knowing Baroque, classical, romantic and modern music. This is before all the conventions and sort of rules that I think solidified in, Baroque era came about. However, most of it sounds extremely familiar and relatable, most of it, but there are really surprising sort of things that happen occasionally, and sort of dissonances or changes in direction that really do surprise you. And for me,
the whole idea of building up dissonance and then finally resolving it into consonance really hadn't taken hold yet.
Yeah. So most of it sounds like it conforms to the logic that's been sort of established and imprinted in your minds of Western music. But there are points that are really sort of, they sound even fresh. Because they're doing something, that to them was exploration, but it
and
wasn't
that we just don't do anymore. So it's
them.
fresh to us too.
Yeah. So that's what's kind of interesting to me about it.
Yeah, this recording is pretty fresh to us too, because it's the Gesualdo 6 are just that. They're 6 male voices.
Right.
And because of their only 6 voices, you can hear every voice very clearly. The recording is very close, and it's very rich, and it's fantastic, really. I thought it was the clarity was just amazing. That's not always the case, especially with Josquin's music. His writing is often very florid. Now, this isn't an album only of Josquin's music, although he has most of the works on it. It's him and his contemporaries, and then there's one of his forebears, and then there's one... The very last one is someone who came from the generation after him. The first work on the disc, let's talk about this now. This is called Josquin's Legacy on the Hyperion label. Johannes Ockeghem is the composer, 1410 to 1497. Oh boy, that's a long time ago.
Very good years, if I remember.
Yeah. I think I read somewhere.
Somewhere. No plagues that time.
No plagues that. Yeah, I wouldn't be so sure about that. I got my knowledge of that history isn't really too present at the moment. Anyway, these are all they're not all church works. This particular one is Intemerata Dei Mater, which means undefiled Mother of God. Okay, there's a lot of it's actually a good time of year to be listening to this, isn't it? With Christmas on its way. All right, so this is all of these works are just one long work, but the album has divided them into 3 sections, and the sections are kind of decided by where the resolves come. There'd be like a resolve and a pause, and then you go on to the next section. I said that having only 6 voices on this make the texts and the contrapuntal lines really pop. Like it's sort of like a modern work. This couldn't possibly have sounded like this back in the 1400s. It just wouldn't have been sung like this. I think it probably would have been sung by a larger group. They weren't just professional, like amazing singers, like wandering around. Okay, well there were individual singers, but not like this, where they're going from town to town and singing these songs. These would have been sung in church. By choirs who rehearsed a lot. This wasn't for the congregation to sing. It's a gorgeous recording. There's a lot of fantastic melisma, one of the great pleasures of Renaissance music. Melisma, when you have a lot of different notes being sung on a single vowel. Like if you have the and then see, it just keeps going on and on. I really love that. All the harmonies register clearly, and the singing is just fantastic in this group. They just will never let you down. The second bit, Nexina te manet, which means not without you remains, any respite, contrasts with the previous one. They're singing without counterpoint in this one, so it's really a textual change that you'll notice if you're actually paying attention. Please do. And Aspiciad facito, have your son look, meaning the son of Mary, which is Jesus. Flowing counterpoint, long-held vowel sounds rather than melisma. So you're hearing a lot of for long periods of time.
The third movement's a little bit more animated here, too, in contrast to the first two.
All right, next we get to the man of the year, Josquin de Pré. Okay. Nymphe de Bois, and this is Requiem Aeternam. Now, Requiem Aeternam is really the third section of this. This is a lament for the death of the composer we just heard, Ockeghem, who was Josquin's forebear. He's mentioned by name in the text that's being sung. And the text references Greek divinities like Atropos, and that was one of the Moirai, who are goddesses of fate and destiny. Ockeghem is referred to as the true treasure and masterpiece of music. High praise from the greatest composer of his era, Josquin. Think of him as Beethoven in 1450. Everybody looked to him. This is luminously sung, and there's a detectable teardrop in the voices, like they're genuinely sad that Ockeghem has died 600 years ago, however long ago that was. Less than 600 years ago. I wonder if that's the genius of Josquin's writing, or the ensemble is creating the effect. Probably a little of both. Okay, the second bit, the second part of this, the second section, is very brief, and it mentions several of the composers of the era who we're going to hear on this album. This is a pretty interesting program for this reason.
Right.
He's telling them to put on their mourning clothes and weep, which I'm sure they're doing anyway. And then the third movement, Requiescat in pace, rest in peace, is it's very simple and very brief. Okay, we get away from Josquin. The next composer is Loise Compère, who I'm guessing is French. Quis numerare queat, who is able to number the savageries committed in war. This is the whole first line. The title is definitely relevant today, so maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this could be made into a contemporary piece, right? It's got a big grand opening with voices going at full power. This is a good test for your stereo, actually. It sounds great. Okay, the second bit is a bit quieter and subtler than the opening. There's a big contrast. The countertenors really stand out in the middle section of this, with high piercing vowels as the lower voices progress through the syllables in the text more quickly. So they're singing the text where the countertenors, who are really up front, are holding those vowels for a long time. They falsetto voices. And the third bit is quieter still, so it's like we're getting sadder and sadder as this goes on. There's a cantus firmus singing the church prayer Da Pacem Domine. The cantus firmus is usually in around the tenor voice or somewhere in the middle, and then everything else sort of decorates that. But there's a different text decorating this. Common at the time. I think we got away from singing different texts at the same time. Somebody might want to bring back, by the way. Actually, if anybody out there is into like rock music or the band REM in the 80s, before they hit their fame in the 90s, they used to do this quite a bit in their early albums. They'd sing different texts at the same time. It was pretty interesting. I think that might have been part of what got me into this sort of idea. I kind of
interesting.
Yeah, it's always a
leap
thing. Well, it's not really, though, because if you think about it, why did I start listening to classical music in the first place? Well, it could have been like seeing Fantasia as a kid, the Disney movie.
Right.
It's inspired a lot of people, and it's a good leaping off point. It's a great introduction to classical music. You know, we should do an episode on the new Disney movie Soul, which could have been Fantasia for jazz, but they messed it up. Oh, we'll talk about that later.
So I've read, yeah.
Oh boy, it could have been. I saw it too, and it started. The beginning was so great. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then they just veered off into this unexpected direction that had nothing to do with music at all. Unbelievable. They messed it up. Anyway, that's for another episode.
Let's just stick with the music today, yeah.
Stick with the music. Just, they had a great storyline going too, and then they got into this weird thing. I don't even want to start with this, because I know I'm gonna.
Forget about it.
Forget about it. So as we go into my my native New York patter. Oh boy, if I hadn't listened to classical music as a college student, I'd still be talking like this. I kind of am in a way too. You can kind of detect that in there. I'm aware of that.
You got something to say about that?
You got something to say about that? I don't think so. Anyway. Next. Okay, track 10, Antoine Brumel. I can't even say this. Regret. Man. This has a very spare text, and it's sung in harmony, not counterpoint, with pauses between phrases. Very easy to follow the text. It's a brief lament for love that isn't working out. So, let me tell you, your wife or husband or your honey is leaving you. You got lots of company. Through the ages.
I should say
that's what's so great about classical music, isn't it?
Yeah, this one is one of those ones that has some. It has a lot of cadences. Okay, that just keep coming, but working up to them. This is one of the ones that has some of those real harmonic surprises.
Yeah,
and the voices move. And you've got these lines, as you say. This one is different. It's not counterpoint type. Right. So you notice the movement of the lines and where they intersect. Some of the intervals that come out are really surprising, and then they hit these cadences, which sound quite reassuring and familiar to you. But along the way, there are some unexpected things that pop up. So I enjoyed this Brumel.
Yeah, the Brumel, track 10. Okay, so you can listen to that. Next, Pierre de la Rue and Josquin Desprez. Now, I was wondering if this was a collaboration or what, and I didn't read the booklet notes, so I never found out. Oh, well. Anyway, you can read them on the Hyperion website, by the way. They publish them. They post them on that site under the CD listing. Absalom Fili Mi. The text is a conflation of several biblical texts about Absalom, this character. Delrue and Josquin. Okay. Tracks 12 through 14 is Josquin again. Ilibata de Virgo Nutrix. Oh, that sounds cool. It means unsullied virgin nourisher of God. That should be an album title. It should be a heavy metal album title.
It does sound kind of heavy metal-ish.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Okay. The countertenor starts this one off with an upward melody.
I was just thinking of the word. My mind made a word dominatrix. It could be
dominatrix.
Dominatrix. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was something to do with whips and chains or a new kind of vitamin, Nutrix.
I think that says more about your religious upbringing than you wanted to. I don't know about that.
Let's erase that. I'll delete that from the podcast.
No, leave it. Leave it. I want everybody to know what's happening on this podcast. Okay. All right. Usually a single voice will start the melody and other voices will fill in the harmony. But in this case, the countertenor kind of really cuts through. The text is very clear in this. It's often sung with a single, very audible voice before the counterpoint follows. Pretty interesting technique from Mr. Josquin. He's referred to as Josquin, by the way. The Desprez part is not his...
it almost comes off like fugue-like the way that it comes in, yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Like, it'll start with a theme, and then everybody else will start playing on it, and then that'll stop and it'll start again. The ensemble colors their voices in such a way that each one stands out. Yeah, this is fantastic. This is one thing about this ensemble I wanted to mention. They have a way of each Now they've obviously gotten together because they all have different sounding voices that are easily done, but they'll pronounce the words like in different ways. Like one of them will use a more nasal tone, and one of them will, be a countertenor, and then another one will sing with this big full-throated sound. And that you can kind of tell who each one is. Like the voices all have such different colors that it's sort of like hearing all 6 voices on different instruments. It's really interesting. And then we go through this whole work. Next, Antoine de Fevin, Nescient Mater, the Virgin Mother knowing no man. Okay. This starts with a typical counterpoint and then thins out as it goes. The text gets more audible. And I like this piece a lot. I don't have very much more to say about it. Worth hearing. Jean Mouton. Yeah, go ahead.
This one has got some unexpected kind of harmonic tensions that come up too. This was another one that I noticed. Some things. Whoa! It made me sit up when I was listening to it. Yeah.
Next, Jean Mouton, Qui ne regarde toi, a lament for Fevin, the previous composer who apparently had died. After his death, whoever didn't mourn him. One of the lines in the text is, "Whoever didn't mourn him is surely a villain."
Ooh. Wow.
Strong words from Jean Mouton or whoever wrote the text. I imagine it might have been him. Anyway, next, Adrian Villert, and he's the generation after Josquin. And we can kind of hear the influence on him. His music is actually more complex than Josquin's, so he's building on this. This is called Infelix Ego, which I think is, I didn't translate this, I think it's Unhappy Me.
Great.
I think that's what it means. I didn't do Latin in school. I know a lot of you people from England in there probably did, but they eliminated it from our Catholic studies when I was a child. And I'm not happy about that. I would like to know Latin. Okay, this is very slow and spacious in the harmony. It fills in, the writer has sinned and asks where he can turn. And then in the second part we learn, where's he going to turn? Not to the Ghostbusters, but to God. Okay. Next, Heinrich Isaac. Esto mihi, may there be for me. This means. This is an understated piece, a quietly sung prayer for God's protection. And the second bit is sung like a Gregorian chant. There's a line that's just in
very
unison
short
harmony. Very short,
nice harmony, though.
Yeah, a brief harmonized line ends this very brief section. Next, back to Josquin d'après. O Virgo prudentissima, O Virgin most wise. This has a gorgeous opening, with the countertenor singing high on a single repeated note. The melody gets handed off between registers. There's a lot of pleasure in this one.
Bass intervals in this one, too. There's really impressive low voice there.
Yeah, when they get to the verse that starts Tu Stella Maris, you star of the sea, I thought that was particularly lovely, with the countertenor singing the main melody with echoes in the lower registers. It's so beautiful. I liked it so much. It just kind of varies the textures between each verse in this movement, and he has a lot of ideas. Mm-hmm. This is worth single this particular one out. O Virgo Prudentissima by Josquin d'après. If you listen to this recording,
what's interesting about this one too is a lot of these this period music works with these kind of open intervals that they don't sound particularly like as we would think as like a major chord or something.
Right.
But this one at the end has an almost kind of major sounding cadence to it. And it just gets this more kind of brightness to the, kind of harmony in it that a lot of the other, voice movements seem to avoid. And here you kind of get that different resonance coming through. So that one stuck out to me.
And also the second section of this has a nice opening as well. After that, there's that cadence at the end that you mentioned, and then the second part opens with the tenor singing the opening melody, and the bass is repeating the first notes at the lower octave. It's right. Really kind of a magical effect. You don't really never hear octaves so much in music like this. It was really like the tenor. It's oh, it's pretty amazing. It was a great sound because it's so unexpected, and then the voices start interweaving after that. This is really special. I liked it a lot. Okay, tracks 24 through 28 are Josquin again. Tu solus qui facis mirabilia. I'm using my Italian style Latin. I know in England they'd probably say like facis, but the C becomes a K. But in English, in Italian, it's more like a CH. Anyway, this one, You Alone Who Do Wondrous Things, this is called. This is sung in fifths, I believe. It's sung in a perfect harmony. I'm pretty sure it's fifths, but fifths and fourths, I can get confused between those. It's a very pure sound. And the whole section goes like this. Do you hear fifths there? Do you remember it?
I didn't make a note on it, no.
I thought it was fifths. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's definitely a perfect harmony. I know that. It's either fifths or fourths.
Because I think it's probably in fifths, and because
it usually is. I mean,
in the really third movement has a variation from that he sort of gets a third in there, and that comes as a surprise to the open intervals. It fills in
the harmony.
Yeah.
So you hear it as major, I guess, or I don't know. I don't remember what it was. Yeah. The second bit is sung as octaves with the counterpoint creeping in. It's kind of interesting. And then the last part, the fourth section, Dung autre amer, was actually used in a mass that Josquin wrote as the theme of the mass. So that's kind of important for that reason. It's very brief though here. And the last part is fifths again, I think, with some contrasting lines moving in the opposite direction, creeping in and disappearing. Really beautiful. Okay, we go to the last work on the disc, Jean l'Héritier. This is the generation after Josquin. Miserere me, Domine, have mercy on me, Lord. This is thickly contrapuntal. So this is kind of like before Palestrina. This is kind of the thing the church was kind of starting to rail against, to the point where you can't follow all the voices, so you're listening to the passing harmonies as your mind flicks from melody line to melody line. At least that's what I found myself doing. This is the generation after Josquin. You can hear it getting more complicated, but there are Josquin masses that get pretty thick too in the harmonic texture. This moves rather slowly, and I guess it's an illusion made by the harmony. When there's really thick harmony like this, it tends to get kind of sludgy.
Notice here, that what he's doing here compared to the earlier ones, and I don't know if they had a terminology at this time, but we would call them suspended chords, suspended fourths and suspended seconds. Those notes that are carried over and then kind of resolved. And I don't know if they had a theory for that at this time, or it was just something that they were experimenting with. But I notice he uses that repeatedly in the first movement of this, which is I hadn't heard coming up to here. So if this is the next generation, it could have been, sort of the thing to do at the time.
I suspect it's something that happens naturally as the music goes on, because it happened again in the late Romantic era, like composers like Mahler, and it started with Chopin, and by Mahler's time, especially Wagner, where they'd have this. You'd have this dominant chord, and there were all these other substitute chords that could just sustain the tension forever. It would just keep going on, and these symphonies got longer and longer and longer. And I think that's just kind of a natural thing that happens as music goes on, and you want to create tension, and you can't do it the way your forebears did it anymore because people have gotten used to it.
Right.
So they just accept it as normal. And now you have to come up with something that's a little abnormal to make it register again that way. Then we got up to Schoenberg, who just did away completely with harmony, and that's just using all 12 tones. Oh boy. All right, the texture changes in the second part of this to the lower voices, and it lightens up a bit, and we hear all the voices. Very complex counterpoint in this last work, and I think they want that the Gesualdo 6 want to show us what Josquin had wrought by the end. Okay, this kind of complicated thing, which would lighten up with Palestrina in the future. Anyway, that's this album, Josquin's Legacy by the Gesualdo 6. boy, if you like contrapuntal singing, Renaissance music, or just choral singing in general, this really is a must hear. These guys are just fantastic, and they make a really unique sound. And if you're interested in the textures and the individual melodies, very easy to hear on this beautiful recording. Highly recommended if the style appeals to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, moving on. I am going to today. I've decided to go for the women's album next. This is the three musicians. They don't have an ensemble name. Thomas Albertus Irnberger, violin, David Geringas on cello. I'm familiar with him actually, and Barbara Moser on piano. They're all the violinists and pianists are Viennese, and Geringas is Lithuanian. And these are piano trios by women. The album is called "It's a Girl"
Where?
with an exclamation point at the end.
Oh, on the album. Oh, I see.
On the album.
When I first
Didn't
looked
see
at
that
this,
coming. Anyway,
I thought the label. I thought when I first saw it, it's not granola.
It's not
crunchy.
I thought the same
breakfast
thing.
cereal.
Oh man! All right, the record label is Gramola with
Gramola,
an M,
yeah.
like Michael. Gramola.
There could be the breakfast food of gramophone listeners.
Gramophone,
yeah.
Gramola. It could be pronounced Gramola too.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm guessing Gramola. Vienna, Austria label. Also, it's an SACD. Thank you, Gramola, for that. So you get surround sound, or you get your DSD.
I wonder if it was a native DSD recording. I'm going to check that out.
It's in surround as well. No, I don't think so, because there's a CD layer as well.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, really?
With that, yeah. But
okay,
maybe
myself.
native DSD might have this one.
I think it probably is.
I would be interested in getting the DSD version of this if it was recorded natively. Anyway,
I'll have to send this your way. Actually, the physical copy, which I have.
Okay, yeah.
It would be worth getting because it's actually really great as well. This was quite a find. Three generations of musicians are playing on this album, by the way. Irnberger, the violinist, was born in 1985. Geringas is 75 years old, and Barbara Moser, the pianist, is 51. So, nice. I like to see the generations playing together. Right?
You got Boomer, Generation X, and Millennial all in one.
Yeah, there you go. Would he be a Millennial? 85? I think that's still. Generation X.
Is it X?
You got Boomer, and you got.
I guess it is X. That's late X.
Would be. Yeah, but Geringas would be he's from the 46. He'd be one of the first Boomers, wouldn't he?
Boomer, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. 70 is she's Generation X, definitely. Barbara Moser, and I think 85 is still Generation X.
That's still X, I guess. Yeah.
You're getting towards the end, though. I don't know. Is he jaded like me? I was born in 1965, so I'm technically the last year of the baby boomers, but I relate more to Generation X because I don't know, the whole, it's just a label as far as if you're going to call me a baby boomer. I'm really
shut
not.
up, boomer.
I just don't have that. I don't have that mentality, Child of the 60s, but the 60s was the time when the baby boomers really kind of took over, so I wasn't really doing anything then. If
you were born and you couldn't experience the 60s, I guess there was no point in being a boomer.
Yeah,
right?
You can't be a boomer if you weren't experiencing the 60s,
right.
I don't know. I don't remember them. I mean, for me, the 80s were the big time, so,
That's right.
One thing I want to say this about the baby boomers always talk about how their music was better than anyone else's, but I don't know. In the 80s, we had really great music. I can't complain.
There's always good music. It might not be what's the most popular.
The 70s
music,
were great.
But...
Well, I don't know. There's still good music now. It's just not popular.
Right. But it's easy to find if you are willing to look. So that's why we're here.
If you listen to the Adult Music Podcast.
That's right. We'll find it for you.
We'll find it for you. We'll tell you what to listen to, and you must listen. Anyway,
when we want your opinion, we'll give it to you. So.
That's right.
As Red Fox used to say.
Yeah. Okay, he
boomer.
He was a baby boomer too. Yeah, right. Oh, man. All right. This is the best podcast ever. I can tell already. Anyway, next. It's a girl. Okay, so these are all women composers. So I certainly hope certain listeners that I know out there who live here in Japan are going to be happy that we're talking about women composers.
Are those
I have people I know
friends?
here. My feminist friends? Yeah, they're feminist friends who don't like music, though. But one or two of them do. They want to know. But I get it. You know, they want to kind of know what. They don't buy records. But I get it, though. They want to hear like the music women made because they sort of relate to that. They want to hear those what sentiments they're going to come up with and things like that, or what ideas. Anyway, the first composer, a composer I've kind of had a lot to say about on this podcast, Louise Fahrenk. She's French, but she sounds German. Trio for flute, cello, and piano in E minor, opus 45. Now, I keep complaining that this composer sounds like Beethoven, but she really doesn't hear. This particular work was written in 1857, and it was her last chamber work. And this is, you might have heard Trio for flute, cello, and piano. That's the original orchestration. Here, her publisher asked her to add an alternative violin voice before he published the work in 1862, and that's the version we hear on this album. Okay, the first movement, Allegro De Chizo, it's a 4-movement work. It's pretty big. And it starts dramatically with shrieking chords and a drumming bass on the piano. And then we get an expressive flowing melody over hammering piano chords. Okay, very dramatic, very lively. The themes are all appealing and even amiable in the second theme. And I said that they're Beethovenian. I always compare this composer to Beethoven, but they don't sound like Beethoven. Some of her earlier works did kind of sound like Beethoven, but this really doesn't. She's really got her own sort of melodic shape or sort of or use of material in this work. We get a repeat of the opening material then, as was typical of the time. The minor key lends themes and aggression when paired to the quick tempo, but not sadness. This isn't a sad work at all. It's a pretty aggressive work, actually. It sounds urgent. In the development, we get some nice dramatic material as the themes intermingle, and the recap sounds gentler, the recapitulation, when the opening material repeats. It sounds gentler. The orchestration has changed in some way, and there's a bit of a coda at the end that generates electricity. Dramatic chords end the movement. Very worthwhile. This is the best I've heard from this composer. And I think this whole work actually is probably the best one I've heard from it, or my favorite one, let's just say.
Actually, with this, I felt it's very much starts out with a romantic kind of feel to it. But as the development sections come through, I feel that
she's going back to the classical era.
Classical styles, and then there are even a few hints to sort of Baroqueisms in there. So compared to the other works I've listened to, as you said, they're very much sort of that early romantic type of thing. I thought this one has some more interesting sort of hints to previous eras that she pulls in once the theme starts to get developed in there. So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, but the thing about that, what you just said, the whole classical thing, this piece was written in 1857. And that era pretty much ended in the 1830s with Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, Mendelssohn, and Berlioz, right? So this is like 20 years after that. She's writing like this. Okay, Beethoven was still everybody's hero in the Romantic era, but anyway, no, but she does have her own sort of kind of profile in this work, and I really did like that. Okay, second movement, Andante, so a slow movement, the movement for the heart, song-like, a lovely theme, again in the Beethoven mold, but doesn't necessarily sound like something he'd come up with. The orchestration is really lovely, with cello pizzicati accentuating the bass line on the piano at some points. Nice effect. There's a lurching theme that provides contrast to the opening again with lovely details. as when the cello plays legato melody and the violin plays short phrases above it. When the main theme comes back, it's in the piano, with the violin playing figuration above it. The cello enters with the theme and the piano accompanies. Nice handoffs here and just sort of transitions. The melody is handed around in unexpected ways, and I enjoyed this a lot. The movement ends suddenly on the tonic, but without resolving all of the tension. So you hear the tonic chord at the end, but you kind of feel like there needs to be more to come. And we do get more in the scherzo, the third movement. Scherzo would also be a title that Beethoven would use. This replaces the minuet and trio of Mozart's era. Okay, the scherzo vivace, and then there's a trio section, very traditional. Virtuosic rushing scherzo, where all the instruments get to play the rushing figure, and the trio is quieter and more ruminative. The fourth movement finale is presto. There's something ghostly about this rushing, continuous melody of the opening, and it reminds me a little bit of the fourth movement of Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2, especially at this speed. It's not entirely like that. It doesn't have the same feeling, but it really does feel like Fahrenk has made a leap into the Romantic era here. It hints at Romanticism, but the classical lines are still intact. The entire movement moves at high speed and high energy. The ending is Beethovenian, so we go back. This is a composer that likes to, she'll kind of go to the, where music is in her era, but then she'll always kind of move back sort of to like an earlier time. It's got an emphatic ending chords, and there's a nice false cadence fake out just before the end that made me smile, I have to say. You think the piece is going to end, you hear that cadence coming, and then it goes to another chord. It's a really, really cleverly planned. I liked it a lot. Anyway, recommended work. I'm curious to hear this work in its original version with the flute instead of the violin, by the way.
I couldn't imagine it very well listening to the violin, just because it's
such a standard
Irnberger's sound is so endearing. He has a really nice tone. Yeah. I was having a problem imagining what that's going to sound like on a flute. Be interesting to hear
it. Yeah, I would like to hear that myself. It's an unusual kind of combination of instruments, though. Somebody will probably put it out one day, though. Okay, next we had Melanie Hélène Bonis, or as she was also known as Mel Bonis, apparently because it sounded like a man's name. There was a lot of this done at the time to get their music sold. Poor women. They were, not permitted into the men's club, shall we say. Anyway, this piece is called Swah Mata. Written in 1907 for piano trio. This is two works, and one reflects the different moods at the end of the day, and the other one is the early morning. The first movement, Soir, is andante cantabile, and it's more conservative in harmony than Matin. It's got a romantic sounding opening, and it reminded me of Fauré, really.
Very French sounding.
Yeah, it is very French sounding. It's very pretty, with the cello and violin dovetailing with the melody while the piano plays an accompanying bass figure, and it comes across as a heartfelt romantic work. The second part, which is called Matin, is andantino. It sparkles with chromaticism and a bubbling agility paired with unusual modulations. That's from the booklet, by the way. That's not me. What I have to say about this is it sounds completely different than the first movement. These two works don't really sound, they don't sound like they go together at all, really. They sound like they should probably be played separately. Muted strings on both the cello and violin, while the piano plays ghostly figuration in the upper register. It's a really interesting sound that they conjure here, and that Bonis has, or Boni probably has written here. The strings provide interesting combinations of sound as atmosphere when the piano solos, and the string writing is pretty inventive. This still comes across as a romantic work in its harmony, though the sound is more impressionistic, meaning sort of like Debussy or late Fauré, maybe. I like the chiming high notes of the piano at the end as the muted strings wind down. It's really nice. I like this a lot.
Very pretty. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hear this. It's worth hearing. Okay, Mel Bonis, Soir Matin. Okay, next, Amy Beach, or as she's called here Amy Marcy Beach. Piano Trio in A minor, Opus 150. It's nice to hear Amy Beach's music getting more of an outing. I've heard this piece before. It's been recorded before, and it's has some of her other chamber music, and it's all very good. She's an American composer, born in Henniker, New Hampshire, and she's a good composer. She's someone who should be on a lot of programs, especially American programs. She's also a very romantic composer.
And French sounding, yes.
And French sounding. You can kind of tell. Well, now this isn't to say that, these women composers are looking to Europe, but all American composers at the time were either sounding German or French. This is the 20th century is really the time when American composers started sounding American, and it was after Dvorak came to America and said that, your native music should be kind of like mined for these bigger orchestral works. I mean, Stephen Foster's music doesn't sound European either.
No, not at all. No.
Yeah, they're very American sounding. So, but he was from the 19th century. But again, that was a different genre. Classical music at the time was looking towards German models, and in Amy Beach's case, French models. But anyway, let's take a look at this work. It starts with a romantic pedal-blurred figure in the piano as the cello plays the forlorn opening melody over it, like someone lamenting on a windswept plain. This kind of reminds me of a lot of those paintings, you see someone like on this open plain, just kind of, I don't know.
High Plains Drifter?
Yeah, she's a High Plains Drifter. That kind of ruined the mood of this piece there, I think. I don't think that was what I was going for. All right. Anyway, that High Plains... The lamenting on the windswept plain bit evolves into a fuller orchestration of the theme, played in harmony on the violin and cello. It's stated dramatically later over histrionic piano chords. Amy Beach uses a lot of histrionics in her works. It gets very agitated. A lot of it does. A romantic gesture, shall we say. There's a nice moment when the rhythm suddenly breaks into a brief waltz. This was a little magical, actually. I didn't expect this to happen. And it just goes away. There's this waltzing rhythm that suddenly happens, and it's almost like saying, hey, this is in 3/4, and then it just disappears. It was pretty amazing. It caught my attention. The movement ends quietly with the piano figuration sweeping under the fading violin and cello. All right, second movement, the middle movement. This is a 3-movement work. Lento espressivo, so this would be the slow movement. This piece goes fast, slow, fast. Is a slow and expressive romantic sounding melody. And it's got a contrasting middle that has children at play quality to it. So it's sort of like excited and sort of sounding disorganized, even though it's really not. As the repeated note melody is passed around from instrument to instrument, this goes back to the more romantic lento melody. As the piece winds down, the playful middle melody makes a brief appearance and ends the movement. The third movement, Allegro con brio, is aggressive and virtuosic piano accompaniment, underlines the rather neurotic violin and cello melody. Wow, we're really going for histrionics here. This winds down to something slower, mostly played by the piano, with violin and cello occasionally interjecting. Melodies then begin being passed around, and the strings take it over for a verse. As the original material returns, the orchestration is reversed, with the strings playing the aggressive accompaniment and the piano playing the chord-based theme. And it's kind of a nice effect in this case. The piece goes into an angular sounding 3/4 for the contrasting section, then quickly resumes the opening material and scurries to the end. Nice. I liked it. Okay. Onwards. Sonia Eckhart Gramate, 1899 to 1974. She was born in Moscow, Russia, immigrated to Canada, and became a Canadian citizen. She's considered to be Canadian, a Canadian composer. This is called Ein wenig Musik, which is called a little piece of music. It's in the form of a rondo. The piano opens with a bass line and melody, which the violin and cello repeat as they enter. And this work kind of acts as a palate cleanser after the Amy Beach. With a gentle descending melody, the violin and cello trade off. The first contrasting section is still slow and rather brief. We get back to the opening, where the piano plays the melody solo, and then the violin and cello overlap with it again. The second contrasting section isn't much of a contrast at all. It's just a brief departure from the main material at the same tempo. If it's even that, it might just be a variation of the opening material. The opening repeats, and there's a playful ending on the piano. It's a pretty work. Maybe it's not a rondo at all. Maybe I just heard it that way. I might be wrong. But it's pretty. I liked it a lot.
It's nice.
Yeah. Last work, Julia Frances Smith. American, born in Denton, Texas.
Yeehaw.
Lived from 1905 to 1989. Denton, by the way, is where Snarky Puppy formed. Although they are now in New York, I think.
Huh.
Yes. So there you go. Anyway, this piece is called Trio Cornwall, and I don't know why. I didn't read the notes to this CD, and I really should have now that I think about it. Anyway, first movement, Allegro Juice. I liked this work a lot. This is pretty interesting. Julia Frances Smith, you want to remember that name. Starts with a lively set of chords and repeated note figuration on the strings. Repeated note accompaniment under the violin, which plays a melody. The second theme features a lot of pauses and fragmentary melody, and the movement takes on a perpetual motion feeling in the development section. So it just keeps, the rhythm just keeps kind of like, it's almost like a snowball that's sort of rolling down a hill and gaining in volume. It's pretty exciting writing. The orchestration is inventive at parts, especially in the recapitulation. The ensemble generates good energy throughout the movement and really throughout the entire album. We could say this. Second movement is a theme and variations. The piano plays the theme solo at first. It's a pretty simple melody, played in thirds, if I recall correctly. I really hope I'm hearing this right. I haven't done ear training in years. Anyway, it gets a winding variation in the strings. Then there are just a lot of variations. We get a second variation with the cello and violin playing figuration, and the piano plays chordal figures. The third variation is pizzicato, with the piano supporting in the bass register. The fourth is broad and overly dramatic. The fifth variation, actually, I'm not sure if this is the fifth or sixth at this point, has a floaty dance quality to it, like a habanera rhythm.
The fourth one gets some like bluesy qualities to it, which is kind of cool.
The broad one.
Noticed.
Yeah.
After the pizzicato, the next one.
Right. Okay, the piano then plays a highly ornamented variation, which the cello takes over. And then there are piano trills accompanying the violin. And it ends rather unexpectedly on a surprise resolve. It just kind of ends suddenly. And we go to the third and final movement, Allegro Quasi-Rondo. Quasi-Rondo is always a really interesting labeling because it's not a rondo, but it kind of acts like one. It's a lively theme. A rondo, by the way, is like you have one main theme that keeps returning. Lively theme that quickly starts developing at high speed. The first departure from the rondo has a slow, dancey quality to it. Then we get something that sounds like a fast tango rhythm, mostly played in the piano, with pizzicati on the violin. We hear the opening melody again, this time in its tango form. There's a lot of inventive orchestration, which we've heard all over this program, really. The piece ends quietly and slyly. This is a very enjoyable work and a nice discovery for people who might be looking for a piano trio to play. In fact, if you're in a piano trio, you might want to check out this album and make some of these works part of your repertoire.
The end of this one actually ends with a little country hoedown.
Yeah, that's true.
So I thought, I mean, there's Americana right there. And I thought, this is a Texas girl at heart, maybe a real Dixie chick before
the Dixie Chicks
were out. Yeah. Because I noticed that hint of bluesiness in the second movement, and then it's a definite, American country influence at the end of the third movement. So there's a lot of humor in her music, and I enjoyed that.
This was a real discovery for me too. I liked it a lot. Julia
like
Frances Smith. Would like to hear more of her music. If you're a musician out there listening, you might want to record some of her other music. Okay, now my third and final choice, I had to go back to the very first podcast for this one. When we decided to first do this podcast, we did a 30-minute or 40-minute podcast as our first episode ever, called Hello World. And the classical choice on that was a record by Stephen Hough, the British pianist, called Vida Breve. So that was our first ever podcast. And being that this is the last podcast of the, well, it's not the last podcast, but the last podcast of new music of the year, I wanted to end with Stephen Hough too. He released 2 other albums this year. This is the second one that he released. Schumann, Piano Works, Arabeske in C major, Kreisleriana, and Fantasie in C major, a work I really love, by the way. Okay, now this is like pretty much repertoire work. This is the kind of thing, like if you're going to go to music school, you're going to inevitably, or if you're going to make a career as a pianist, you're inevitably going to learn these works and probably play them live, at least when you're a student. They're very difficult, and they're really separate the men from the boys as far as pianists go. See if you're going to be able to do this or not. I want to point out these works were written in the late 1830s. Now, I want to give you a little context for this. If you think about popular music, the 1960s were the big era of the electric guitar, right? We think about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and just the electric guitar in general, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, okay? If you go back to the 1920s, that was the big band era. So swing, if you were alive in the 1920s, swing was just in your blood. It was just everywhere you listened, especially if you were in America. But even in like Western Europe as well, it had traveled overseas. The point I'm trying to make is that the 1830s were the era of the romantic piano. This is when most of all of the first and some of the most famous of the great romantic piano works were written. It was kind of like what the guitar was to the 1960s, the piano was to the 1830s in Paris specifically. And everybody who was somebody on the piano lived there at the time. Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn. Now, Liszt and Mendelssohn would eventually go to Germany and kind of form their own sort of schools. But the 1830s were a happening time for the piano. Anyway, here we have a program of Schumann's piano music played by my personal favorite pianist, Stephen Hough. Although I like Stephen Osborne a lot too. Sometimes I have trouble choosing between the two. I really like them. But he's playing a program of Schumann's music, and I have to confess, as I get older, I like Schumann's piano music more and more. When I was younger, I really didn't like it much. I don't know. It's really quirky and very odd. But as I get older, I love the creativity that's in it. His music is a fusion of reality and fantasy, sort of like the writings of E.T.A. Hoffmann. If you think about the story of the Nutcracker, or if you've seen the movie The Red Shoes, these are all E.T.A. Hoffmann stories. And he inspired Schumann as well as many other composers, really. Schumann's music also fuses poetry and music. And as a result, if you listen to Schumann's songs, his songs are really magical. The words can't be removed from the music. They're almost like soldered together in some odd way. He's really unique as a composer in that way. So if you kind of play it like as an instrumental without the words, it somehow loses something. His piano music is often in multi-sectional forms, as we'll hear in Kreisleriana on this recording, and they're really bound together by the pianist's handling of time and texture, and the listener's willingness to go along for the ride. And this is from Natasha Lodge's booklet note. It's sort of like the case with movies. I remember when I was a kid, we were watching. My dad and I were watching a James Bond movie. And some villain or band of villains pretty much shoots at James Bond at point-blank range, and he runs away, and he doesn't get shot. And it really upset my dad. He's like, how could they miss from that distance? But the point is, I don't know, at that age, I just sort of intuitively understood this. You have to be willing to let go and just enjoy the excitement that such a scene kind of presents you. And I think that's the case with Schumann's music as well. You have to be willing to go along with it, really, because it's really so unusual. And the pianist Stephen Hough, what a joy it is to hear him in these works. They're difficult to put across due to their quicksilver nature. They're constantly changing. and the emotions are constantly shifting. And Hough is just such a great pianist for this kind of music. He's got this real presence and so authority that when you're listening to this, you just know you're hearing it the way it's supposed to be played, even if it can be played another way.
Yeah, within one movement, there's a lot of resets and changes, and I could see how it could be very kind of emotionally wearing to play through a program of this, because there's various climaxes and changes of direction of sort of the feeling that the music is striving for, and then again it's going in a different direction, and it all calls for sensitivity to dynamics, and all within one movement even. So I can see there's a big demand on the sort of range of expression that you need to have ready to get through just one piece like this. So.
Yeah. Oh, incidentally, I want to mention too, this is a great recording of a piano. When we did Vida Breve back in February on our first episode ever, I found the recording to be really distant, and I guess to encompass like the big climaxes in Hough's playing. But this one is recorded more like I'm used to hearing Hough, and it's a beautiful recording. It's very present. And all of the dramatic material registers very strongly. Absolutely fantastic. Oh, by the way, if you're interested, Stephen Hough, his third release of the year was a disc of Chopin's Nocturnes. It's a double album. And that was only recently released and is getting amazing reviews. I actually haven't heard it yet, but I'll have to listen to it because I really love this pianist a lot. Okay, anyway. The first... piece is Arabeske, in C major. Too much whiskey here. Written in 1839. Okay, it's a 6-minute work, but it's cast in a fragmented multi-section form. The piece is anchored by the regular return of the opening melody. The opening melody is kind of an amiable, innocent sounding theme. And it's got a blocky second theme. The third theme is very slow with lots of rubato. And then we return to the opening. The arabesque nature of the piece has to do with all the decoration around the simple melodies. Like the melody will be in the middle. Like if you're playing the piano, this really is a pianist's piece. The melody's sort of in the middle. And with the fourth and fifth fingers of the right hand and of the left hand, you're playing like a bass and like a sort of like just an accompaniment in the right hand. And with your thumb, you're pretty much playing the melody with your thumbs and like index fingers. It's really nutty. It's sort of hard to play. That's why it's called arabesque, I guess. Next is a harsh attack is made on the melody in a dotted rhythm. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, it softens at the end. The main melody returns again. And this is sort of like a rondo, whereas the theme keeps returning. Hough plays the work with plenty of excellently judged rubato and plenty of shadings of dynamics. And that's really what makes this so listenable. If you listen to an amateur pianist play music like this, it's just not going to come across. You really have to put something of yourself in it to really make it work. Schumann leaves a lot of room for the pianist's personality. Okay, after the theme, we get something slow and reflective, higher in the pianist's range, and the piece ends with this slowing, dwindling rhythm and melody. Okay, tracks 2 through 9 is Kreisleriana, one of the great Schumann piano works, written in 1838. The title comes from the fictional pianist Johannes Kreisler, who appears in the writings of E.T.A. Hoffmann. He has this white-hot sincerity when he improvises at the piano. And in Hoffmann's books, he's the paradigmatic romantic composer among people of the time. So he's really what every pianist was striving to be, basically. And Hoffmann sort of, took like all the elements that he loved of the best pianists and put them into this one guy. Okay? Each individual piece itself divides into several contrasting sections, recalling the imaginary Kreisler's wild mood swings, which is a an appealing thing about romantic composers at the time. Personally, if I was alive at this time, I know I would have hated all of these people. I just wouldn't be able to bear to be around them. But I like their music a lot. Anyway, thankfully, I was born when I was. As well as the two alter egos that Schumann had invented for himself. Okay. Schumann kind of... He actually called himself after these alter egos too. One of them is Florestan, who is exuberant and just bouncing all over the place, and Eusebius, who is an introvert. Each piece explores an extreme of some sort, either in speed, in intimacy, in sinisterness, tumultuousness, reflectiveness, whatever. If these emotions are going to come up, they're going to be presented in an extreme. So this whole set, listened to together, is an emotional roller coaster, and it's no wonder for professional pianists love playing them. First movement, there are 8 movements in this, right? Yeah, 8 movements. I don't even know how to say this. Äußerst bewegt is the äußerst bewegt is the label. This starts dramatically and passionately, and it's loud. It has lots of figuration outside the main melody, like an arabesque. It's kind of nicely paired with the opening work, in fact. This has a calmer middle section with similar figuration, which goes back to the passionate opening. It's a pretty traditional ternary form. Okay, the second movement, to me, is the one that really expresses Schumann's character. Sehr innig und nicht zu rasch. It's got a quiet and innocent theme, which rises and falls, and this would be Eusebius at work in his introverted nature. After this section, something more exuberant is heard in complete contrast, which is Florestan's character. And the piece pretty much goes back and forth between the two characters. It's got a big full sound in the parts, in the louder parts. Hough projects this beautifully and grandly. The quiet introspective section returns, and we eventually hear the familiar opening in a different guise, then more or less an original tempo, but orchestrated differently. The movement ends with Eusebius getting the last word. It's very quiet. Longest movement at 8 minutes and 47 seconds here. The rest of the movements are fairly brief. Third is Sehr aufgeregt. This has a pretty odd galumphing rhythm in the bass, which rises into the treble, and then we get a contrast, a luminous, clear bass line, and the melodic line over it. Its ternary form, the galumphing rhythm, returns to end the movement. Hough's articulation of the melody in all of this is amazingly clear. Fourth movement, Sehr langsam, starts with quiet playing of chords with the melody stretched over them. Again, the gradation of tones that Hough gets is a real pleasure to listen to. The contrasting middle section is louder, with a climbing melody and arpeggiated bass, and lots of rubato, very expressive, in Hough's hands. Fifth movement, Sehr lebhaft. Lots of brief trills in the melody and figuration. It sounds active, like it's jumping everywhere on a pogo stick. And the music it quietens into something more subtle with rubato than the opening pogoing melody and rhythm. It comes back and dissolves again. A very loud outburst of passion arrives and fades into quiet rumination. The opening returns rather quietly. Then, at its opening tempo and volume, we hear the theme again. This movement leaps from emotion to emotion and sounds very erratic. Hough manages to make it sound all of a piece. In fact, I want to mention something about Hough's rubato playing, and this makes me want to hear his Chopin nocturnes as well. He's so good at this. Like, rubato is kind of a slowing of the rhythm. It should sound like elastic, like a rubber band being stretched, and then we go back to the rhythm. And he's so good at just projecting that feeling. You just get the feeling that you understand why this technique exists. It's really good. Sixth movement, Sehr langsam. Very quiet and slow opening with many pauses between phrases. Again, an outburst of passion with arpeggios leading up to each melodic note. Think of the pianist Kreisler, the imaginary pianist here. Whenever those outbursts of passion come, it's his kind of quicksilver nature, his romantic nature can't be contained. This quietens as our composer Kreisler regains his composure. Seventh movement, Serach. Outburst of passion with volume and fast virtuosic figuration around the melodic material. There's some very impressive virtuosic playing here from Hough, with each note clearly articulated in the texture. Pretty amazingly played, really. Last movement, seventh, Schnell und Spielend. This has a leaping appoggiatura melody with ghostly held bass notes supporting it. This is really Hough playing very quietly in the bass. Great technique. There's a middle section with a louder volume, then the leaping material returns. I especially like the quietness with which Hough plays the bass notes and holds them to underpin what's happening. There's another outburst, so this is kind of like a rondo type theme again. The opening leaping material returns, and the movement and piece ends with barely audible staccato bass notes. Whew. Okay, well, if you're not exhausted after that, the Fantasie in C major comes next, Opus 17. I actually like this work a lot. This was a rather unique interpretation of this. Now, Hough has played this before. In the 80s, he made a recording of it on the, I guess, the Virgin label. It's now available in a box called the Erato Years. He wasn't... Those records weren't released on the Erato label at the time, I don't think. But anyway, that's beside the point. He's re-recorded it here. The first movement, all of these movements have very descriptive, titles. I'm not... Durchaus fantastisch und leidenschaftlich vorzutragen, which means to be performed completely with fantasy and passion. No problem, Robert Schumann. Okay. This movement, by the way, quotes Beethoven's An die ferne Geliebte, which means to the distant beloved. There's this absolutely gorgeous romantic opening to this piece. Oh, play this on your stereo at home, your best recording equipment. It sounds fantastic. One of the pleasures of romantic music is that the bigger pianos that were being used at the time were able to produce overtones, and composers wrote with that in mind. And we hear this big romantic opening full of overtones and perfectly judged rubato from Hough. This is a major wow in this section. In the quieter second subject, Hough gets a full tone on very quiet playing. I'm enjoying this. It's like I heard it for the first time, because I first heard this work when I was in my 20s. This is a huge virtuosic movement, clocking in at 13 minutes, with big romantic flourishes and ruminating melodic material. Putting this across is about keeping a sense of the form, and Hough does this perfectly. I found the whole thing compelling. He also gets an edgy, loud bass sound when he needs it. Hough keeps a sense of the form even as he manipulates the rhythm via rubato and other stretching and pulling techniques. Beautifully balanced. This is really something to hear. Highly recommended there. Second movement, mäßig, durchaus energisch. Moderate but with energy. This is the middle movement. Clara Schumann, Robert's wife, reportedly loved this march movement with its fanfare-like themes. Robert and Clara wrote a lot to each other and about each other in their various diaries, which we have access to these days. By the way, if you ever wonder, Clara Schumann, one of the great piano soloists of the 19th century, by the way. If you're ever wondered what Clara Schumann was like in bed, you can find out because Robert Schumann wrote about it in his diaries. Boy, the things these people, gave to posterity. Anyway, this movement is...
I just, hold on. I have to have another drink after that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. And I've erased that image from my mind.
Now that you erased it, Clara Schumann was kind of a hottie, though. I think she was kind of, yeah.
Oh, well, let me see.
It depends on which picture you
find those diaries on Amazon. Let me see this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She was beautiful. She was a great pianist. Jeez. She inspired Brahms, I don't know. Anything you want to say about that?
There's a lot of stuff going on back then.
Yeah, there was. Oh, boy. Yeah, they let it all hang out. Okay, this movement is played with dignity and presence here. It's all very extrovert and loud. There's a contrasting middle section that presents a more intimate profile at times. And the sudden speeding up of the melodic line, it sounds teasing and playful. I guess that's what Clara Schumann liked about it, kind of that whole bit. Can you imagine that? Your he's writing this music and you're playing it, and you kind of understand the emotion, and you're putting that across to an audience. It feels really naughty in a way. I don't know. Anyway, the work is in ternary form. The opening material returns. Excellent speeding up on the coda to end the movement in an exciting way. Third movement, langsam getragen, durchweg leis zu halten. You know, I can pronounce German better than that when I haven't had a glass of whiskey before.
You need schnapps.
I need schnapps for that, maybe. Okay. Solemn and slow to be played quietly throughout. A writer... I once read about this piece, and this movement was associated by one writer I read, and especially the opening part, with the opening shimmering arpeggiated material with a phenomenon known as Fata Morgana. A Fata Morgana is a mirage in which ghostly images appear above the sea's horizon. For example, there'd be a ship on the sea's horizon, and they're objects. You can see examples of this on Wikipedia if you look up Fata Morgana, by the way. It's caused by layers of different temperatures of air. So, like if you see there's a ship in the distance on the horizon, the ship will look like it's floating above the horizon. And that's what that is. And he's sort of, the opening is kind of like that misty sort of, it's giving that misty sort of feeling of the air that causes that to happen. The Romantic people were fascinated in the 19th century, were fascinated with phenomena of this kind. They kind of liked this whole idea of this dream world, this kind of maybe not even imaginary to them, but this kind of like this whole idea that there was this other place that they partially inhabited, and they tried to put that in their music a lot. This particular interpretation of this is a little unusual. Hough takes the quiet opening very fast, yet is very generous with his well-judged rubato. He integrates its speed into the overall tempo, whereas most pianists purposely play this section at a slower tempo than the rest, presenting it as an interrupting presence. So this was pretty interesting. I like the approach. I'm just so used to hearing it the other way. Hough's speed gives the movement a magical feeling with its soft volume. The movement builds to a bit of passion towards the middle, nice picking up of tempo to add anticipation to the quiet ending. This is an odd piece. It ends on a quiet, reassuring tonic chord repeated 3 times. This piece is in 3 movements, and it goes fast, fast, slow. Now, that's not normal. Usually it's sandwich-like. It's fast, slow, fast, right? But it's like we're getting the meat at the end, okay? This is a beautiful recording and fantastic playing by Hough. Really definitive. Like, you can't really call any recording of Schumann definitive, but this is one that is for the ages, I think. It must be heard, and it'll be listened to as one of the great Schumann recordings, I believe. Definitely worth a listen.
He really pulls out all the contrasts that are implied, in Schumann's music, I think. And takes you on an emotional roller coaster. It must be draining to play the music like this. And as you say, the constant theme.
It was draining to listen to.
Yeah.
Say that.
But the thing that pulls you sort of through it is the rubato nature of most of these works where
he's so good at it.
Yeah,
too.
And he just knows how to push and pull at the right parts in there. And it actually wears you out to listen to it. You might want to take a break between the works on here.
And there are 2 very big works on this album.
But with everything that he records, extremely well done. And as you said, this recording, in contrast to the one we did in our first episode, sonically is much more rewarding and sounds really
so
great.
Too. Yeah.
It just captures whatever distance It's certainly closer mic'd, but not too closely mic'd. It's just right for the full resonance and the dynamics that he's focusing on in these works. And so sonically, it's a real treat too. So yeah, another masterful performance by Stephen Hough.
Yes, we'll be hearing more about him in the future because I really love this pianist a lot, and I recommend you all.
Yeah, again, this one's on
catalog. Really,
this one's on Hyperion, so not available on streaming. You can check out the samples on their site. The links are in the description. But
yeah, worth buying though. Just go for it.
Buy it. Buy yourself a Christmas present.
Yeah, this will be a big present for you. All right. And there it is. I'm hanging up my classical music new albums for the year, although there's still more to come next year in 2022.
In the jazz realm, I guess, since we got rid of all of our Christmas selections last week, Christmas, you would be thinking, let's go for a sleigh ride.
Right.
But we're not going to do that. We're going to ride the train.
We did that last week. Oh, we're riding the train. Ah, yes.
We're going to ride the train. And
what train are we riding, Russ?
That's going to be the Coltrane.
Oh, yeah.
The John Coltrane train. Now, as you know, if you've been listening to us, we focus on our recent releases on the Adult Music Podcast. And if you hear John Coltrane, any jazz fans will know John Coltrane, who was born in 1926, died in 1967, before his 41st birthday. So he was only 40 years old. But John Coltrane is, one of, if not the greatest geniuses of modern jazz, who left probably the greatest imprint on saxophone, tenor saxophone, soprano saxophone, saxophone in general, but also on the direction of jazz music. In his career, he started arguably, in the bebop era, through post-bop. Then he was there in the modal exploration of music with Miles Davis, and then into the avant-garde and free jazz in his later years. Really, his, push of individualism, you could put from 1957 to 1967. In 10 years, he did so much and transformed music in so many ways that, people have been unpacking and trying to figure out what he's done ever since then. And certainly the saxophone players after him, many great players made whole careers just focusing on, a small slice of what John Coltrane did in his career. There's so much that he worked through. He was working out new discoveries and harmonic possibilities in music, while at the same time, being on his own kind of spiritual quest as his music pushed towards kind of spiritual influences too. And although some of the music that he recorded at the end of his life is rather difficult and, really pushing the concepts of jazz, even today in free jazz, there's a versatility to his music too, because he also recorded some albums that anyone would enjoy who has even, a passing interest in jazz. His ballads album is really beautiful. He recorded an album with maybe you would think is an unlikely collaboration, but with Duke Ellington. It's a really great recording, and a fabulous recording that's extremely beautiful with the vocalist Johnny Hartman, just John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. That's a wonderful recording. Along the way, while he was, pushing out all of these real, frontier pushing kind of developments in jazz, But tonight we want to look at not those kind of things or John Coltrane's recordings on his own, because those all happened, before I was
more
born.
Than 50 years ago. Yeah, right.
And what's really hard to wrap your head around.
It's really weird to think this was like kind of taking over the world, and yet you and I were born into. Well, I think he was still around when I was born. I was born in 1965.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, he died in 63. I don't remember.
67, yeah.
67.
So,
well,
yeah.
I was too young to know. But the thing is, we were born into this world where that music already existed, and that's sort of a strange thing to think about, because it just kind of, for the people who were there at the time, it just kind of wasn't there, and then it was there, and the whole world changed,
Now, the hard thing for me to wrap my head around, too, is contemporary of John Coltrane, a little bit younger, so born in 1930, but who influenced John Coltrane, and then Coltrane influenced him as well, was Sonny Rollins.
Oh, yeah.
And Sonny Rollins is still alive. He's retired from performing in the past few years. But to think that Coltrane left us so early, and then Sonny Rollins is still around, it's really sort of a mind-boggling kind of time type of thing. But anyway, as I was saying, we're not listening to Coltrane's music, Coltrane's performing today. The focus is going to be on his compositions, because he left behind on his musical journey of exploration lots of great compositions that get recorded here and there, but not really focused on to a great degree in sort of one collaboration or recording. But since the fall, there's been a bunch of these that have come out. The last one we'll talk about was the first one that showed up on my list, and I was going to include it on a sort of saxophone release special episode. So I've been, just holding it on my list. And then these two other ones came up, Coltrane, and then another Coltrane just this month. And I thought, well, we've got three new recordings of Coltrane compositions. And so that has to be an episode all on its own. So tonight we're going to ride the train. And along the ride, you're going to get a variety of ensembles and performers, yet not well known and then very well known, and a nice tribute in there as well. So the first one, we're going to start out with the most pared back performance, and also a name you probably don't know, an up and coming performer. This is the drummer, Vinnie Sparazza, from Utica, New York. Hey, and, known for, among other things, and I actually have this. My uncle had this. It was a sort of bar clock kind of thing.
If you're thinking what good can ever come from Utica, New York, just remember, Jesus came from Nazareth. That's right.
And I'll tell you what wasn't good, and that was Utica Club. It was, this horrendous beer that I have. Maybe it was good at one time, I don't know, but anyway, I have this clock that was my uncle's. It was Utica Club. So anyway, he's from upstate New York. And now he's based in Brooklyn, playing on the New York City scene. And this is his recent release called Play John Coltrane on the Fresh Sound New Talent label.
I just want to say, I was born in Brooklyn, and there wasn't much that was really good about Brooklyn at the time. It was a cool place, but now it seems like to be this really happening place to be. It's like there's a lot of good talent there. There always has been, really, but it always went somewhere else, I guess.
Yeah. It's going back to Brooklyn. Back to Brooklyn. From Utica. Anyway, and so this is a jazz trio. And Sparazza on drums. On piano, Jacob Sachs, a player who's been around a while. And this recording really turned me on to his playing. And on bass, we've got Masa Kamaguchi. Very Japanese sounding name. I don't know his background, if he's been in the U.S. for a long time or not. Anyway, going through these recordings, I wanted to find the provenance of all these Coltrane tunes, because Coltrane's style and approach changed over his career. So I was interested to look these up, and I tried to also put the releases in order of sort of development as much as possible. So this recording starts out with a tune called Big Nick, which is a catchy tune by Coltrane. It was composed in 1962, and he did initially record it with his own group in that year, but the more famous version is with Duke Ellington on Duke Ellington and John Coltrane. And this tune is one they think may have been inspired by a classical piano piece by Poulenc.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, you'll have to listen to it and check it out.
I didn't
yourself.
pick that up.
Yeah. Anyway,
do you know what piece? Do you know what piece it is?
I'm not sure. No, I just read that on an analysis of the piece.
It could be anything,
but I don't know. Yeah, because I know I've heard Poulenc, but I don't know his music so much. Right. Anyway, this one really this whole album really highlights sax piano playing. It's a really nice touch, and he shows a light touch here with a swing on the melody. He builds it up to a big dissonant kind of chord. A solo and this shows his style. There's a lot of rhythmic freedom in his playing when he solos. He's playing around whatever the drums are doing, but he always holds it together very well. He takes some harmonic diversions on this one, and he's graceful. Kawaguchi gets a bass solo on this one. And then sax trades fours with Sparazza, and he shows the first example of his tasty drumming. He's a very much a drummer who's like into tone and texture. And so this is a really relaxed and tasteful take of this tune to get things started.
Before we go on, I just want to point out the pianist's name is Jacob Sachs, S-A-C-K-S. Now that sounds like sax, S-A-X, which was Coltrane's instrument.
Yeah. And
I don't want to get us confused between this. There is no saxophone on this recording. It's all piano bass. It's a piano trio basically. It's piano, bass, and drums. Yeah, so let's get that clear.
There's no sax, and the guy named Sax doesn't play sax; he plays piano.
Yeah, okay. So when we say the word sax, we mean the pianist.
That's right. The second tune is, if you're familiar with Coltrane, you probably know this one. Saida's Song Flute from Giant Steps, one of his breakthrough albums, 1960. The famous offbeat riff and melody is that you're used to hearing on saxophone is handled on piano by sax.
By Jacob on second.
Who's on
second? I don't know.
I don't know who's on bass. Yeah. So anyway, it works into a fast swing.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And in Sax's piano solo, he takes pieces of the melody apart really well. There's a nice accented accompaniment along with his solo ideas in the left hand and also on the chords as well. And then he trades again with Sparazza on this one. The third track, also from Giant Steps, Naima. And done slow and sparse like the original, but starting right in with bass improvisations from Kawaguchi. So it's a little bit of unexpected beginning rather than going through the melody. Sax's piano solo has lines that run and then end in a rocking rhythm that is kind of interesting. So somewhat like the original in character, but changing up the format. Track 4 is called Satellite, and this is from the 1964 album Coltrane's Sound. And this is a contrafact of How High the Moon, a jazz standard. You may pick up snippets of that, but this is one of Coltrane's sort of experiments in harmonies. You could call it like a giant stepped on version of How High the Moon, because he's working on how to pull apart the harmonies here. However, Sax does some interesting things here. He takes, I believe, the idea of satellite, as in, a man-made kind of orbiting thing, and he comes up with these kind of interstellar interference sonic sounds. So he has these intervals that are bouncing all over the place in this tune. And he starts that out with the bass intro. He brings the intro tones back to spice up the melody throughout his solo. And sometimes his hands seem to be doing like seemingly impossible different things, like they're operated by, a different person altogether. Kawaguchi gets a kind of exploratory solo here, and Sparazza also gets some skin time on this one. So I think it's sort of the tune was originally a contrafact. A contrafact means a reworking or taking the harmonic progressions of one tune and writing a new melody over it, whereas Coltrane is also reworking the harmony here. So it doesn't bear a lot of
the holes, I guess.
Yeah. Track 5 is Lonnie's Lament, and this is from the 1964 Coltrane release Crescent, and also a later 1977 release of an earlier recording than that in 1963 on an album called Afro Blue Impressions. After Coltrane passed away, a lot of his older music was being re-released in different combinations, and it gets a little bit confusing. Anyway, this one has a free-form bass intro. Sax comes in on piano, rubato. Sparazza adds nice light touches before getting a soft solo of his own. This one shows, again, he's a real subtle drummer. He doesn't overpower his bandmates. Bass and drums return for a bit, and then Sparazza gets more time, and he builds it up the second time around more to the close. Track 6 is called 26-2. This is a tune. It was recorded by Coltrane in 1960, but released 10 years later on an album on Atlantic Records, the Coltrane Legacy. And this one had McCoy Tyner on piano, Elvin Jones on drums. The composition itself is another contrafact. It's a reworking of Charlie Parker's Confirmation. So the original chord changes are altered by Coltrane in something that sort of came to be known as Coltrane changes, and it revolves around sort of third related chord movements rather than the originals. So this was sort of another kind of harmonic problem that he was working out here.
Do you know what the title refers to?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
It could just be a date, as far as I know. Because he did record some things that were untitled. But
anyone knows, let us know.
Yeah, you can
send us an email.
Check it out and see what you think of this one. But everyone knows, all jazz fans will know Confirmation, the Charlie Parker tune. So you can probably follow the harmony on this one. Track 7, we go back to Giant Steps, Cousin Mary. This is a blues, kind of Coltrane blues from that album. They play the melody kind of straight, but with dense chords. Sax solos on piano with lots of spaces between his phrases. He works up to some runs with agility. He sometimes shifts out of the rhythm and then back in without seeming to be uncomfortable at all. Kawaguchi takes a bass solo that also uses a lot of space for anticipation. And then sax on the piano, and Sparazza trade choruses a few times. And sax explores a bit more, but Sparazza keeps it tight and light. Track 8 is called Central Park West. This is from 1964's Coltrane's Sound album. The piano and bass start out this ballad tune. Sparazza joins in lightly. It's very pretty, but sax finds interesting intervals and exciting runs to try out in his solo. Kawaguchi has a nice melodic solo on this one. He gets up in the upper register, but his sound stays warm and he has very clear attacks.
I actually said this one has a very pretty end of the day, weary New York vibe to it.
And I thought it was thinking like a rainy day in the park or something. It's very atmospheric. One of Coltrane's compositions.
I like the way he used the whole upper end of the piano here too.
Yeah,
it was very nice.
He's an intriguing piano player. He has his own individualistic style that I really like. 9 is Bessie's Blues. This is also on 1964's Crescent, but it shows up on a lot of his later recordings as well. It's a medium-fast swinging blues. Sax plays the piano, plays the melody on piano rather lightly. His solo works out sort of interesting harmonic and rhythmic problems that he seems to pose to himself and then answer within a really narrow range of the piano before he expands outward. So it's sort of like he starts working out these equations in the middle of the keyboard and then, searches for extrapolations of them. Then Sparazza and Kawaguchi trade off choruses, keep it kind of subtle. Then we end up with track 10, After the Rain. This one's on a couple different albums, 1963, To the Beat of a Different Drum, and also on the Impressions album. This one starts with a bass intro, some cymbal rolls. Sax comes in gently on piano. Kawaguchi fills in the chord gaps. It's very slow and pretty. Sax focuses on textures on the piano, pretty cascades of notes. It's a very nice, subtle performance. I like this recording a lot. Sparazza is the leader, but he's extremely subtle drummer. He never overpowers his bandmates. So he's really like an ideal trio drummer. He keeps, awesome time, but he does it in a relaxed nature. So he doesn't intrude on whatever else is going on. And his drums sound great. They have great texture and tone. So I hope we hear more of what he's doing. And the recording is a nice showcase for Sax's piano work. He has a really nice touch and a unique rhythmic style. And the trio plays well together. Kawaguchi fits in perfectly with them, and he has a nice bass sound and concept that works. So if you haven't heard of Vinnie Sparazza, check it out.
Yeah, I want to say this album, it was kind of an interesting take on Coltrane's music because there's no saxophone on it.
Exactly.
I think I've never heard any. I don't think I've ever heard these tunes played without a saxophone before. So it was a bit of a surprise, unique take. It was interesting to hear them play
that's
like
what I mean.
this. Yeah.
I thought it's interesting because it's focusing on Coltrane as a composer rather than as a monolithic, sax player.
I think more people should try this. I'm kind of interested in hearing how these compositions would translate to different ensembles that don't have a saxophone.
Definitely agree.
Yeah.
Now we'll get another take on these for the second selection, an album that just came out this month. Another jazz musician who's gone to the great beyond. Harold Mabern.
That's sad. Yeah.
Great piano player.
His playing here. Yeah.
Came up from the late 60s through the 70s up till today. Kind of hard bop, a little soul jazz resume. And this is called Mabern Plays Coltrane on Smoke Sessions Records. But it's not just Mabern here. You're going to get the greatest of all the Smoke Sessions guys, including John Weber on bass, the great Joe Farnsworth on drums, who we featured his new release a couple weeks ago. Vincent Herring, we featured his recent release also on the podcast on alto sax. The amazing Eric Alexander on tenor sax, who, like you say, you're going to do Coltrane works and you're the tenor sax player. You better have taken your Coltrane pills because everyone's going to listen to what you do. Fortunately, Eric Alexander has all of his vitamins ready for this one. And we also get the great modern trombonist Steve Davis, who I saw in Osaka many years back, actually. It was with
those years just keep going.
The new Composers Octet, with Freddie Hubbard. And I got to meet and talk to Freddie Hubbard that day with Xavier Davis, too. I mentioned that in a previous episode, but Steve Davis was there that night, too. And this is a live recording at Smokes, and it's really grooving. So this is really happening, kind of groovy selection of Coltrane tunes, and it just fits the style of these smoke players. And it's a lot of fun. So here we start out with the Homie Dance from 1961 Ole Coltrane album. This is one of Coltrane's various harmonically different blues tunes. See, whenever Coltrane would take a blues, there's always, something new harmonically in it. Mabern gives out the chords for a chorus before the horns jump in and play the melody. Steve Davis solos first on this one. He's one of the top New York trombone players today. He's relaxed, but he finds some cool harmonic spots in the solo. So much so that Mabern gives him a enthusiastic grunt mid solo, which shows his approval. And so that's cool. Vincent Herring's up next. He has his usual fire burning on an intense solo. Whenever you hear him, he sounds like a stick of dynamite. His tone is always just searing and ready to explode with some new idea. And then Alexander here, he shows off some of his Coltrane vitamins with some reverential licks. And the guy is a real awesome tenor player, capable of anything. And then Mabern gets his own solo. He really digs in with chords. Mabern's a player who plays a lot of chords, even when he's playing a solo. And, so he digs in with really thick chords, always well accented, and he gets some rolls in there too. But he leaves most of the highlight to the horn players here. But a nice kind of jammy beginning here. Then we go next.
I want to mention, by the way, Mabern is 82 years old on this album.
Amazing. Yeah.
And he takes some really great runs. Because usually your technique is kind of falling apart by this age, but he's still...
He's spot on.
He's got a lot of good stuff, yeah.
So we should say this album was just released this month, but it was recorded in 2019, which is when Mabern passed away in September. Yeah. So it was within, some months of his passing, and he still sounds on top of his game here.
As does the album. This is a fantastic sounding album too. Really clear.
Yeah, these smoke guys, they were learning on the fly how to record music because neither one of them came from a music and recording background. They were just music fans who, from the story I read, got their recording equipment and training based on input from the musicians. And it's worked out really well because both using the club as a studio and the live sessions, they all always sound great. And what they have, their recordings retain or recover the interactiveness and the spatial sounds that have been lost on a lot of these modern sort of hermetically sealed, recordings where all the players are isolated and everything is overdubbed and you lose all the spatial dynamics. But the smoke recordings, either live or the ones they do as studio dates, always have that kind of spark and naturalness to them. And this one is no exception. And it's live, you can hear the crowd on it. But, sometimes when you hear a live album, the players are inspired, but you lose something in the sonics. Not the case here. It sounds great, and you have the energy. So next we get another blues, Blue Train from 1958. Blue Train. So we are in the earlier periods of Coltrane here. Still, you can check out the different harmonization of the melody on the repeat, which is nice because they've got all the horns there to do that. Alexander's up for the solo first. He keeps it bluesy. Davis on trombone is next. He's bluesy too, but he works things in and out of the chords, again, to Mabern's approval, with vocalized kind of grunting there. The horns join in back in the backing over Davis's solo, which is cool. Add some fuel to the fire. Herring gets screaming on this one. He's always got that burning intensity. But a lot of people say he sort of incorporates a lot of Cannonball Adderley's bluesy approach, as a modern player, and I think he does. And he always sounds intense. Mabern, in contrast, rather than being bluesy, he sounds very happy with a melodic solo here, and he works into some really chiming melodic chords. And then Weber gets a rhythmic bass solo before they go back to the head. It sounds like they're all having a great time on this tune.
Another thing I want to mention, by the way, about Mabern's playing is he doesn't just comp when the other musicians are soloing. He's listening, and he'll indicate that by playing bits of what they've just played. Like he'll echo them in the piano. It's really fantastic. I imagine it would sound really encouraging to the other players as well. You know?
He's a great sideman.
I really enjoyed that.
Even though he's the leader here, but he's interacting with the soloists. Track 3, Impressions. This is first recorded, I believe, 1961. Transcendence album. Here we go. But of course, also on the 1963 Impressions recording. Mabern goes around the up-tempo chords first before the horns join in on the melody and the backing lines. Herring solos here, again, lots of fire and direction in his sound. Davis on trombone, a lot of agility in his solo here. And Alexander, again, shows a lot of Coltrane influence in his solo. He works through phrases that weave through the harmonies. It must be, when you're playing all Coltrane tones and you're the tenor player, you must feel some, responsibility to show that, you've learned the lessons of your mentor, and he certainly has. Mabern plays a real rhythmic solo with punchy chords alongside his melodies here. And then the horns trade off phrases with the great Joe Farnsworth on drums. Another nice performance. Track 4, Dear Lord. This one, 1963, first recorded on to the beat of a different drum, and also Transition, which was recorded in June of 65, but released after Coltrane's death in 1970. This one, only sax for the horns, and it starts with a pretty piano intro by Mabern. He actually quotes Bach here, Jesu joy of man's desiring. Then he turns it into a gospel feel, which is really cool. Alexander carries the longing melody, and then Farnsworth pushes it along with nice cymbal work. Mabern's solo here has some faster lines in his right hand, kind of compared to the earlier solos where he's doing mostly chord things. And then he starts some rhythmic and rich kind of major 7 chords. And then Alexander's solo matches the uplifting moods set by Mabern's groove. So a nice kind of different feel on this one.
And I think the audience was really uplifted by this because they like applaud at the end. Right. This is the first time we hear them, really. And
then we're going to end up with not a Coltrane composition, but a tune that he made his own from The Sound of Music, the Rodgers and Hammerstein's tune, My Favorite Things. So Coltrane kind of had a jazz hit with this on his 1961 My Favorite Things. This sort of hit the cool jazz scene at the time, and college students were into it and whatnot. Anyway, it gets an extended piano opening. And again, as Mabern mixed Bach in his the previous tune, here he mixes hints at the My Favorite Things melody with a tune called Ai no Corrida, which was arranged and had a hit by Quincy Jones in 1981 or so. I forget who the singer on the recording was, but I should say that Ai no Corrida was...
I know what you're going to say.
You know what I'm going to say. It was the title in Japanese of a film which got the English title of In the Realm of the Senses.
Yeah.
Does that ring any bells? listeners in Japan or otherwise.
Well, I don't know about in Japan, but in the West too, it's become quite a
this film
kind of notorious film. Let's say
it was notorious because in order to get around the Japanese censors, this film would never be released for general viewing in Japan. It's
still never been released for general viewing.
It actually was released as a French film, and let's just say that. If we want to say adult music, this is certainly an adult movie.
Yeah, it's an X-rated movie, basically.
It's an X-rated movie.
The director wanted to make an artistic X-rated movie.
Right.
And the reason why it was never released in Japan didn't have anything to do with the sexuality of the movie. It had more to do with the anti-war elements of the movie, the anti-military elements of the movie. Because the main character, the male lead, is sort of devoted to the life of the sensuality rather than the life of warfare. And so there's a political statement being made in this movie, as well as it being very X-rated.
X-rated,
shall we say?
That's right. Anyway, the tune for based. I don't know what the connection of the tune to the movie title was. The tune was written actually by Englishman Chaz Jankel.
I know corrida, by the way, means loves bullfight.
Right, loves bullfight. And so this Chaz Jankel, an English singer and instrumentalist, wrote this tune the title based on the movie The Realm of the Senses, original Japanese title, and then the song was recorded by Quincy Jones and became a top hit. And probably, I don't know if anyone put together all of those things, and somehow Mabern finds that to mine into my favorite things. Maybe you like the movie a lot. I don't know. Could be.
That is really complicated.
Yes. But we're all adults here, so
yes, we are.
Anyway.
Well, we better be, because we're listening to the Adult Music Podcast.
Yeah, that's right. He takes that and builds it into a big harmonic finish, and then he launches into the menacing chord intro for My Favorite Things, putting the melody in there. Finally, he plays around with it a few times with some embellishments, improvisations, before Herring comes in for an alto solo, who builds tension with really long, yearning notes. Alexander comes in on the major section there of the melody, and he works in and out of the chords and to the extreme registers of his horn, sounding very Coltrane inspired. Everyone drops out for a Weber bass solo that includes some harmonics and glissandos. Then Farnsworth gets some more space to show off his great technique. Mabern and Weber join back in. The rhythm gets more funky. Mabern gets a new groove and a little bit more improvisations to a final unique ending of the tune. It's really nice. Then we heard Naima on the previous recording done rather in the style of Coltrane. They give us a different take here. It's an upbeat version of the tune, which I've never heard before.
Yeah, this is really unusual.
Coltrane's original version is very, very slow, but here it's really upbeat. Mabern comes out with a happy beat, and Farnsworth makes it into a samba. Unexpected. Herring carries the melody on the tune. The arranged horn line harmonies are great. And then Herring solos first. His solo is peppered with sort of 16th note lines and searing tone. Mabern grunts approval at Davis's smooth solo, again, in contrast to Herring's fast lines. And Mabern himself has a very percussive solo here, some dancing right-hand figures. Alexander gets a solo too. However, they bring the ending down slow like the original tune, but with some nice horn harmonies added to it. So an interesting arrangement of this well-known Coltrane tune. And we end with track 7, Straight Street, from the 1957 album, is earlier Coltrane's original period, just the Coltrane album. It's a nice horn arrangement on the melody. Get some stop time in there. Farnsworth makes the most of the rhythm style switches in the tune. Herring gets another piercing solo, Davis swings hard on his solo. Alexander's in a smoother mood on this one, and Mabern is animated and bouncy. The horns come back with some descending lines that trade off with some more solo space for Farnsworth before they head back to the melody. So it's another great smoke session live date. Passionate performances, some unique arrangements of Coltrane's tunes, all inspired well. Mabern was a classy player with a unique interactive style, and this is a good date to remember his great playing with. Fun performance.
Yeah, I loved it too. It was really great. Fantastic recording. Great. Yeah. Even when the other solos were playing, to tell the truth, I was kind of listening to Mabern. He was just so intriguing throughout. Yeah. I liked him a lot.
Yeah, he didn't lose his touch near the end. Yeah, at all.
I'm just sorry I learned about him so late. I wish I had known him like throughout my 20s and 30s as well.
Yeah, very enjoyable piano player and great performance. Well, and to wrap things up, this album actually came out first among these three, and it came out in September. And I was going to put this one with some other sax recordings, but here I included it with all these Coltrane things. And I saved it for last because I think this one is, for several reasons.
It was kind of rough going, really.
Well, I mean, that's the nature of
this music.
This music. This is David Liebman. David Liebman's Expansions. That's a group he works with, and it's Selflessness, the music of John Coltrane. It's on Dot Time Records. And what I should say, why it's last, because it focuses more on the later music of Coltrane, because that's the influence on David Liebman. So David Liebman is a monster saxophone player who grew out of the first emulation of John Coltrane's music and inspiration. He played with Miles Davis and has been one of the leading figures in saxophone. Now, to make it clear, if you don't know Dave Liebman, he is not an emulator or imitator of John Coltrane. He has his own unique and instantly identifiable sound and style, particularly on soprano saxophone, which he has played over his career. And on this album, he returns to focusing on almost exclusively. But as a sort of, I don't want to say devotee, but someone clearly inspired by Coltrane's music as a springboard for his career, he focuses mostly on the later period of Coltrane, and when Coltrane is getting into more avant-garde things. And David Liebman is very comfortable in a free jazz element where a lot of his recordings focus on. And so that's why I saved this one for last. So we've got David Liebman on soprano sax. He also pulls out a wooden flute for one track, which is pretty cool. Interestingly, in this group, his Expansions, he's got another sax player with him, who I didn't know much about, but is an awesome player in his own right. Matt Vashlishan, an alto sax player, who also plays flute and clarinet and wind synth on here. On piano and other keyboards, we've got Bobby Avey, and bass, Tony Marino, and drums and percussion, Alex Ritz. We start out here with a tune, Mr. Day. This is from 1962 recording, Coltrane Plays the Blues. The bass starts it out with the hesitant bass line from the original, little variation on that, but it retains the kind of nature of it. It's a Coltrane blues with altered harmonies. Ritz mixes up the complicated rhythms incredibly. This guy's a really skilled drummer with what he can do with mixing up beats behind the bass and through the tune, and the whole album, really. The alto and soprano share the melody. Vashlishan is up first on alto. He works through all the harmonies with intensity, getting in some bluesy phrases. The groove changes up for Avey's solo on piano. And again, he's soloing over this really complex drumming from Ritz. These guys are really good at holding things together over complex rhythms. Liebman comes in smoothly, and then he takes off with one of his trademark kind of flying lines. If you don't know his sound, it's instantly identifiable. Once you hear it, you'll realize what he does. He is, I know you hate this term, but the Coltrane style was often called the sheets of sound.
The sheets of sound. Yeah, that's one of those expressions. I think we got to come up with something better to explain that.
Whatever that idea is of playing parts that you can hear sort of vertically on a horizontal instrument that's limited to one tone at one time. So how do you explore harmony on an instrument that can only play one note at one time? I think that was the sort of challenge of John Coltrane's harmonic journey. And Liebman is a player who has so much agility, flexibility, especially on soprano, and he gets these sounds. Sometimes you wonder, is it a note or is it only a sound, or what is he doing? But you'll get used to that sound if you don't know his playing on this album. He can be so fluid, but yet he gets some sounds are part squawk and part note. Right. He's all over the place, taking your ears on a journey of harmony and melody all at the same time. And the bass takes us out after the melody repeat.
I think I should mention this is not a laid back recording by any means. So you really want to have your kind of Coltrane sort of head on when you're kind of listening to this, because it's going to make you you're going to need to focus and concentrate on this. It's not easy music, let's say.
What I first came to know David Liebman,
intellectually challenging.
Although I mean, he played with Miles Davis in a lot of Davis's later sort of more electronic type music, and but when I was listening to trumpet recordings when I was a teenager, Tom Harrell was one of my
right. I remember I have a lot of CDs from you.
I have everything Tom Harrell recorded, but one of his recordings, Dave Liebman's, I think it was a tune called "Dream in June," and it's one of these. Tom Harrell writes compositions that are sort of like a problem that he has to solve. It's a compositional problem that he's going to solve improvisationally on his trumpet. And David Liebman comes in and he plays one of these solos from outer space. And I was like, what is that? And I remember looking at the album notes. I don't remember who wrote them, but the commenter described that as an artful strangulation of the soprano saxophone. That always stuck in my head. It's like he's destroying the instrument as he's playing it, and it sounds great at the same time. So, he's really a singular type of approach to playing this instrument. Two, Compassion. This is from 1965 recording, Meditations. So Liebman is going to get into more of Coltrane's later sort of spiritual kind of works a lot in here. So this gets a bass ostinato opening. It also has some synthy sounds that create a trance-like mood. Liebman comes in on soprano with a mysterious theme. Vashlishan is on a wind synth, electronic kind of wind instrument here. And Liebman explores some modal ideas, and the overall effect of this one becomes sort of exploratory, sort of spiritual quest kind of feeling. Track 3, we get another version of My Favorite Things. Piano intro here in the high register creates an atmosphere before finding parts of the melody and then taking some rhythmic explorations. The bass and drums come in with the groove. Liebman and Vashlishan trade off on the melody on soprano and alto before they join in together. And then Vashlishan is off on his own solo. He builds it nicely, swings hard through the fast phrases, finds some rhythmic riffs before coming back to the melody, passes the baton off to Liebman, and Liebman is really free-flowing here, gets some really cool rhythmic and melodic licks in between all of his sort of kite flying on the soprano on this one. They come back to the melody, but they make a rather unexpectedly slow and different ending to the tune, so make sure you listen all the way to the end. 4, Ole. from Ole Coltrane again. This one starts with a frame drum intro that the drummer plays. So I guess the definition of a frame drum, it's a very old drum from various cultures, but it's a drum where the width of the drum is greater than the depth. So you've got a big skin, but kind of a shallow kind of drum. So you can get a lot of different tonal possibilities out of it.
It makes a cool sound.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you get this sort of ancient could be from any culture kind of sound going on. But this tune itself is kind of a modal kind of working that Coltrane wrote probably over a Spanish folk song, El Vito. So he was working with kind of Spanish modes when he composed this tune. And then Liebman comes in over the drum on a wooden flute, and he's improvising over these modes. So it's a very kind of, modal effect that he's coming in on. And then, very cool, Vashelshan comes in and joins Liebman on clarinet. So you get this interesting blend of wood flute and clarinet. And then Liebman switches to soprano, and they play the melody together. So Avi is playing a kind of an electric piano sound behind the melody, but he switches to a distorted synth kind of tone for a solo here. So it gets kind of electronic-y there. After another round of the melody, then Liebman solos a bit on soprano and Vashelshan on clarinet. So you've got a kind of Spanish-tinged modal kind of thing with some synthy. It's a really interesting mix of things going on here. The next track is Lazy Bird. This is from Blue Train, 1958 too. The tune is thought to be inspired by Tad Dameron's Lady Bird, but with these chord substitutions. It's kind of like these, what they call like a backdoor kind of cadence progression. It's sort of using like tritone substitution things to rework the harmonies of it. And we're back to alto and soprano on this one. The melody is played over a really complex rhythm and bass line. After the melody, Avi's up first for piano solo. He starts it with rolling chords. Then he works through these really undulating lower chord things into some more melodic ideas. And then Liebman gets a solo and Vashelshan as well. Then we've got track 6, Peace on Earth, which I think was recorded in the Live in Japan concerts, 1966, and then released on various recording issues after Coltrane died. This one has a really dreamy intro on soprano, lush piano, and cymbals. When the solo rubato melody starts, Vashelshan joins the soprano sax with flute. Other than some trilling and a few improvised like filling lines after the verse, it's played very straight, like almost completely as composed, and they join together again for a pretty ending. So this is sort of into Coltrane's kind of spiritual type of composition period. Track 7 is One Up, One Down. This was recorded in 1963, but never released until 2018 on the Lost Coltrane album you may have, called Both Directions at Once. I got this when it came out. It's an energetic tune. After the melody statement, Liebman gets a short improv spot before the repeat. Then there's some dark descending piano chords, and Ritz is ready on the drums for an extended solo section. Liebman joins over the drums with one of his soprano strangulation solos from outer space. It's really cool to listen to. And then they are back to the melody and take it out. Track 8, Selflessness, the title of this compilation here, from 1968, Selflessness featuring My Favorite Things. Also, there was a 1965 recording, Kulu Se Mama, this was released in 2000. It's hard to keep track of when all these recordings were originally recorded and then finally released. This is a sort of a free-form spiritual style from Coltrane's later period. It's got a lush intro, piano, the soprano and alto trade lines and joined together. Ritz works up a complex beat added to by Marino on bass. Avi adds synthy sounds on the keyboards in addition to the piano. The saxes trade solo segments before they join together with more synthy sounds added. And then Avi gets some contemplative space on the keyboard over Ritz's ever-changing beat. He works up the intensity with these huge chords, faster lines before the saxes return for a final melody statement. And the recording kind of closes out with Dear Lord, 1963, on both To the Beat of a Different Drum album and also Transition, which was recorded in 1965 and released in 1970. This is a kind of unique ending to the album. It starts with
we actually already heard this on Mabern's album, but it's a really different sounding version.
Completely different version of this. It has a bowed bass intro. Marino gets really low and very resonant with some open intervals on the bass. Then Liebman and Vashlishan join in very tenderly on a rubato melody. Vashlishan's on flute. Marino continues the bowing through. Ritz adds tom and cymbal texture, kind of fills in there. And it's played very straight and composed very serene, very different from the Mabern version. So it's kind of a pretty ending to the album that's often exploratory, maybe challenging to some listeners who don't listen to free jazz, but I think it ends on kind of this spiritual note, which was also a hallmark of the search of Coltrane was searching harmonically and spiritually at the same time. And his music has a great depth. I think it's taken, and you can still find a lot of things to explore after all these decades.
No, we always will. It's that kind of music. It's just going to always be sort of.
And so I feel the first two albums are, looking at Coltrane as a composer and seeing what you can do with his tunes, even in a modern context, and that should be done more often, not only with Coltrane, but a lot of the sort of originals penned by the great jazz musicians themselves from bebop, post-bop, and further on up to modern times. But of course, Liebman, as a saxophone player who has studied and built on the things that Coltrane developed, I think is paying a deeper, debt into the style and sort of deeper meaning of Coltrane's music, as he does on a lot of his recordings. And so this is a fine tribute to a certain spiritual nature, and hence the Selflessness title to that. And Liebman is competent in all styles, but he's very able to capitalize on the free style of jazz, because he can launch into these sort of explorations, and he's not held back by imagination or technique, especially on soprano sax. So interesting recording, I felt.
Yeah, another thing that needs to be said about this recording is it's just a fantastically clear recording. The bass and drums are just, you're right up front, very present. Everything is. It's a joy to listen to that way. It's very demanding. I personally have always been fascinated. I'm always fascinated with spiritual quests in general. So Coltrane's quest for From a Love Supreme on has always kind of intrigued me. So I was really intrigued by this. It's not an easy listen,
it's
though.
Deep
I have to
music.
say.
I mean, even some of his musical collaborators who worked with him in the previous periods sort of gave up on that music because they thought they didn't have anything left to add with what he was doing in sort of the later period, and it's a real challenge.
It's funny because later musicians have based like their whole careers on it.
Yeah, and still people are still looking to it today. So, but definitely, if you want a guide through that, Liebman is one of the ones who've dedicated so much to that period. So
so a bit demanding, but highly rewarding if you do the work, let's just say.
So if you want to ride the train instead of the sleigh this week, hop on to these 3 recordings. It's amazing they all came out.
Get that sleigh out of here.
Yeah, get that sleigh out of here. They all came out since September to December, 3 Coltrane composition recordings. I guess it's one of these morphic resonance type of things. Someone gets an idea, the vibrations spread across the universe, and then people are tuned in and ride the train.
There you go. Not a bad way to end the year of talking about new albums, huh?
New albums, old ideas, intriguing concepts.
Indeed.
And a good year.
Next
42 episodes. What's that? 6 times 4. We didn't do 6 for the first couple albums, but
there were a few we did. We did 4 last week to 8 last week. I don't know. It's always kind of
230 plus albums.
So we heard around 230 albums, let's say. Yeah,
it's going to be a lot to pick from the best of. Whew.
Yeah, which we're going to do next week. So next week is going to be. There's not going to be any new music on next week's podcast. We're going to talk about just the albums that really stood out for us this year. Yeah,
we might find something that we missed or something to sneak in there too. So, but it'll be largely
give that a listen.
A year in review. And as we said, Christmas is coming, and we'll be glad to get that over with once you open your presents. And so
I like the days before. The thing I'm really kind of disappointed about is that we're working until December 24th. Like, Christmas isn't celebrated in Japan as a holiday. They do acknowledge it as kind of like this kind of day where they eat Christmas cake and stuff. They think it's nice, but we're working, right up to the Christmas Eve, and I feel like I don't have any chance to really get ready for the holiday.
No festive time.
Yeah, the big holiday here is New Year's, as we mentioned last week. So
anyway, if you haven't got your festive fill of Christmas tunes, go back to last week's episode. You can pick up a few things
great.
From there.
I want to say we love Christmas tunes, despite what we're these little.
We just don't like Christmas. That's
no, we like Christmas too. We like Christian Christmas. We're not too crazy, but Dickensian Christmas. Let's just say it that way. Home and hearth and all that nonsense.
Yeah.
We just offended like half of our listeners, I think, if not all of them. So how dare we?
Anyway, you can check that out for last week if you want some Christmas tunes. And the year in review comes up for episode 43, and then we'll be off to new things for 2022. So this has been episode 42 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. As always, thanks for listening all the way to the end if you're still here. And do like or subscribe on whatever service you're listening to us on, whatever platform. And
send us an email wishing us a Merry Christmas. Or a Happy New Year, or both.
Please do. Or both at Adult Music Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. And we'll be back again one more time the day after Christmas. So when you're bored with all your presents and you got those socks from Mom that you needed, but they weren't very exciting.
You need to recover from what Uncle George said about you at the dinner table.
That's right. You can tune in the next day, and we'll give you some new music to listen to tide you over to New Year's. So until then, Merry Christmas.
It would be new old music.
Yeah, new old music.
You should listen to it all again because it's that great.
It's that great. And not Happy New Year's yet. We'll wish you that next week.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Have a Merry Christmas. And if you didn't get the present that you want, go out and buy it for yourself. Because that's what I always do. Yeah, that's what I always do. That's right. Anyway, we'll see you again the day after Christmas with episode 43.